Dearbhla, Chief Executive Officer, Frank Nine, Chairperson, Pat Hebert, Director of Regulation, and William Fitzgerald, Veterinary Director. Before we start, I just want to read privilege. Witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence to give to a committee. This means that witness has full defence and information action granting said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses follow the direction of the Chair in this regard, and a reminder of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from an occasional side of parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice in this matter. Privilege against defamation is not applied to publication by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official, either by name or such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Parliamentary privilege is considered to apply to utterance of members participating online in a committee meeting when the participation is within the parliamentary precincts. There can be no assurance in relation to participation online from outside the parliamentary precincts, and members should be mindful of this when their contribution. I now call on the witnesses to read their opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Rosia Conairn and the wider greyhound racing industry, I wish to thank the Chairman and members for the opportunity to address the committee today. I'm accompanied by Mr Frank Nyhan, Chairperson of the Board of RCE, Pat Herbert, who's Director of Regulation, and William Fitzgerald, who's our Veterinary Director. I wish to begin by acknowledging the staff of RCE, the circa 6,000 trainers and owners across Ireland, and the wider greyhound community for their commitment and hard work during what has been a difficult period for the industry. As with many sectors of society, the pandemic has presented unprecedented economic and organisational challenges. Income generated from gate admissions, tote operations, restaurant facilities and other areas were effectively decimated, and like other sporting organisations across the country, RCE greatly benefited from the government supports. On behalf of the Board and the wider greyhound racing community, I would like to acknowledge the Minister's ongoing support for our industry. These supports ensured that whilst tracks were closed to the public, racing still continued. But more importantly, it ensured that RCE was able to continue expanding on the range of care and welfare initiatives that it operates. As a newly appointed CEO, my focus, and the focus of the Board, is for Ireland to rank #1 globally in delivering best-in-class welfare programmes and care standards for racing greyhounds. No healthy greyhound should have its life ended prematurely. As the industry regulator, this requires acting upon solid data and responding with a zero-tolerance approach to breaches of welfare. We also wish to restore commercial activities post-COVID and in the medium term to develop a right-sized industry model for the sport that fits the country and delivers best value for our largest shareholder, the Irish taxpayer. Attendances need to be restored with enjoyment and distribution of the sport structured.
I have to go to a vote, and Senator Lombard is going to go into the chair. Okay.
Thank you. As I said, attendances need to be restored with enjoyment and distribution of the sport structured such that it serves both rural and local communities, whilst regaining its place as an urban and tourist attraction. We also need to restore and rebuild the image and perception of greyhound racing in Ireland, and armed with facts and the right welfare and care initiatives, debunk much of the negative image and perceptions attached to the industry, some deserved and some misplaced. As CEO, I want to impress upon committee members today that care and welfare remains the priority of the Board, and that RCE and the greyhound industry is making significant strides forward in this area. For example, 2021 marked the first year of operation of the Rosia Conairn traceability system resets, which ensures that the status of all racing greyhounds is available at any given time. Under this new system, registered greyhounds are tracked through all stages of life, including birth, microchipping, racing career, changes of ownership, location, export, retirement, and end of life. Owners, trainers and breeders are required to maintain an accurate record on the traceability system. through direct notifications on the Reset's web portal and mobile app every 42 days. And this time period of every 42 days is key. Compliance is mandatory for every greyhound owner or trainer who wishes to enter any greyhound in their care in a race or a trial at an RCE track. No compliance means no racing, no exception. Automated suspensions were introduced on January 15th of this year. In 2021, 23,760 greyhounds were subject to traceability on resets. Of this figure, 18,538 greyhounds were active, which means they had a status of currently racing or trialling was assigned to them. 5,222 greyhounds were inactive, which means they have stopped racing or trialling activity in Ireland. Of this 5,222 figure, RCE can now report on and categorise the inactive greyhound by status of exported, rehomed, retained as a pet and deceased. The numbers of recorded deaths can also be further extrapolated to capture general cause of death. So the system allows for a proper and clear analysis based on facts and not assumptions, and gives RCE proper data upon which it can enforce its recently expanded legislative powers. The success of this system means that apart from cattle, racing greyhounds are now the most regulated and tracked animal on the island of Ireland. And I think that's worth repeating. Greyhounds are now the most tracked animal apart from bovine animals. Resets has already led to an increase in directed and focused inspections. In 2021, 1,221 welfare inspections were carried out, and 914 carried out to the end of April 2022. A record of 2,000 inspections are planned by the end of this year, which compares to 615 inspections in total in 2019. These inspections are both random and targeted. In 2021, 10 welfare notices and 82 fixed penalties were issued, with 62 fixed penalties issued so far this year. This compares with 4 fixed penalty notices in 2020. Phase 2 of the traceability system, which is currently in development, will add further functionality and reporting to the system. It will include a microchip scanning project, the recording of injury data, and the uploading of veterinary certificates. Whilst RCE is authorised to regulate in the jurisdiction of Ireland only, it is our aim to build on the very successful delivery of resets by using the valuable information collated together with regular information exchanges with our counterpart organisation in the UK, which is a huge destination market for Irish greyhounds. The continued expansion of resets coincides with the development and further improvement of a range of other welfare and care programmes. They include the Greyhound Care Fund. This is a fund dedicated to a variety of initiatives for the care and welfare of the greyhound. The fund receives 50% of the proceeds from all current sponsorship obtained by RCE, 10% of all admissions and restaurant packages, and 5% of net tote income. RCE spends well in excess of the government stipulated 10% of the Horse and Greyhound Fund on welfare. In 2022, we budget to spend more than 3.6 million on welfare and traceability. This is up from 2.2 million in 2019. GRI operates a range of foster care initiatives supporting foster care homes, of which there are currently 6, and they are currently caring for 135 greyhounds as of May. And 2 new greyhound care centres, which are currently under negotiation following a tender process. RCE operates and funds the Irish Retired Greyhound Trust, a registered charity which provides rehoming opportunities for greyhounds both domestically and internationally via direct placement and by providing financial assistance to private rehoming agencies. In 2021, the IRGT rehomed 2,234 greyhounds. This represents a 25% increase on 2020's rehoming figure of 1,775. 422 greyhounds were rehomed with the Greyhounds Trust in the UK in 21. The IRGT has also made arrangements with reputable US rehoming agencies who would place a number of greyhounds from Ireland. These are Greyhound Pets of America, Finding Loving Irish Greyhound Homes, and Flying Irish Greyhounds. some of which have decided to pay 100% of the costs of transport. Despite the great work of the IRGT, rehoming is becoming increasingly challenging, as all animal welfare agencies are finding. This is in part due to the war in Ukraine and the return to work for millions of people across Europe post-pandemic. And whilst greyhounds make for wonderful family pets, RCE will continue to advocate and educate that the responsibility of the greyhound is ultimately with its owner, who must be prepared to care for their greyhound for the entirety of its life and beyond its racing career. And we plan to bring forward initiatives both educationally and practically that will reinforce this responsibility. RCE this year announced a significant expansion of existing supports for seriously injured greyhounds, including the Serious Injury Scheme and the Dental Assistance Scheme. And next week we will launch a new kennel improvement scheme, providing financial assistance for the upgrading of kennels. In late 2021, RCE launched a new code of practice approved by the Minister that applies to any person who keeps, breeds, rears, trains, races, trades or transports a greyhound in Ireland. And finally, the laboratory analysis of samples obtained from greyhounds is an integral part of integrity and welfare programmes within RCE. I'm delighted to report a marked decreasing trend in relation to adverse analytical findings reported over the 6-year period to 2021. In 2021, 4,859 samples were analysed by the INAB, with 13 or 0.27% adverse analytical findings. That's down from 29 adverse analytical findings, 0.54% in 2017. This indicates a well-regulated sport that takes its integrity responsibilities very seriously around doping and medication control through the implementation of a multifaceted approach to testing activity. To assist RCE in fulfilling its mandate as a regulator of the racing greyhound sector, updated legislation has begun to be enacted. RCE urges that the current statutory instruments, such as legislating that euthanasia of a greyhound must only be carried out by a veterinary practitioner, is with the Minister and that it is adopted as soon as possible, and that amendments to regulations as submitted by RCE under the Greyhound Act 2019 be amended accordingly. We want to raise the greyhound racing industry to a new level, where the culture around care and welfare is such that no healthy greyhound has its life ended prematurely. With the correct legislative tools, we can do this. Aside from further expanding our care and welfare schemes, RCE's focus in 2022 is to get attendance levels back up at our tracks and offer entertainment as a destination tourism attraction, as much as a place of pride for the local greyhound owner and enthusiast. Work is underway on a new 5-year strategic plan which will build on the significant developments under care and welfare, in addition to developing a racing model that is economically viable, that is scaled appropriately for the country and its population, and that brings the buzz back. We're delighted to announce that this year the Irish Derby will be once more broadcast live on national TV from Shelbourne Park, returning the sport to its rightful place. Whilst the industry needs restructuring, it also needs investing in key capital projects, such as Shelbourne Park, which is to greyhound racing what Croke Park is to the GAA. The board of RCE has unanimously affirmed its long-term intention to retain greyhound racing at this historic site and is committed to delivering capital improvements that will enhance the stadium and the track for the people of Ireland. Plans and designs for this state-of-the-art investment are underway, with works expected to commence in early 2023. Why should investments such as this matter? Well, apart from the sport's deep roots in communities the length and breadth of the country, greyhound racing is also a significant net contributor to the Irish economy. A report compiled by consultant economist Jim Power and published by RCE in July 21 shows that our industry made a net contribution to the Irish economy of 132.3 million in 2019 and supported 4,150 full-time and part-time jobs. An additional 6,211 active greyhound owners derived economic benefit from the industry in 2019. That was the last full year of activity before the pandemic. An investment of a further 117.8 million was made by greyhound owners in 2019 in preparing and racing greyhounds. This is a significant amount of expenditure, and much of it is injected into local economies and supports thousands of local jobs. Wagering activity on greyhounds contributes to the overall betting levy collected by the Exchequer. The levy was increased from 1% to 2% in 2019, resulting in a return to the Exchequer of 95 million in 2019. Furthermore, an estimated 8 million per year was raised at Greyhound meetings for worthy causes prior to the pandemic. In a post-COVID world, Greyhound Racing is seeking to re-establish itself as a significant vehicle for fundraising for sporting organisations such as GAA clubs and charitable causes. As I previously indicated, our industry will continue to face difficult challenges as the country exits from the pandemic. The ongoing challenge for RCE is to continue the development of a commercial greyhound racing industry built on a consumer-focused and high-quality entertainment product, which meets the highest possible international regulatory and welfare standards. I look forward to working with the RCE board, staff and the wider greyhound community to explore new opportunities for the development and growth of our industry. Again, I wish to thank the committee for affording RCE the opportunity to address you today. My colleagues and I look forward to answering any questions that members may have, and if there is additional information required arising from this meeting, we'll be happy to forward such information as swiftly as we can. Many thank you.
Thank you very much for your very comprehensive opening statement. I'll now call on Senator Daly.
Thanks, Chair. And I want to just welcome the representatives from RCE here this evening and thank them for a very comprehensive submission. And I suppose we dealt a lot with the whole greyhound side of things, particularly on the last committee. I think myself and the Chair, who is absent at the moment, will return, are the only two survivors from that committee. But there was a lot of controversy at the time, and the 2019 Act was, we did the pre-leg scrutiny on it. At the time when you were in before, while it may be a change in personnel, I suppose you're still representing the same body. I want to welcome the great work you've done on the traceability system. That was a major issue. And it reads anyway, you know, like it will do what it says in the tin, and it will be a major help to the situation going forward. And as a suckler farmer myself, I agree with your comparison. You know, the calves, the cattle of Ireland are actually more accounted for and more easily traced than the human beings. So if you can aspire to that standard, you're definitely achieving the goal. But I do remember at the time, the last time, there were a number of greyhounds, I suppose it would be pre your new traceability system, which were untraceable within the system. And could you give us any update on where those untraceable, for want of a better word, dogs that were discussed previously may now well be, or what progress you have made in overcoming that issue? Just a couple of other points from your submission. You say that GRI have 6 foster care homes and there are 2 more in the tender process. Are there many more out there that are showing interest? And would I be correct in saying I have had certain individuals on to me who are saying that it is a very prolonged process, it's a very slow process, and it takes a long time to actually get your premises through that tender, that there possibly and probably would be more people willing to become foster care homes if your acceptance or criteria was, I won't say easier, but if the paraphernalia was cut through a little bit quicker. They seem to lose interest as time goes on. And there are only 2, maybe a comment that there are only 2 under negotiation at the moment. Like, will 8 be sufficient, or are there many more expressions of interest out there over and above that particular 8? Just quickly, when you say you've made a submission to the department, or you've been in contact with the department with regard to updating the 2019 legislation with regard to only a veterinary surgeon or veterinary officer being accepted as somebody who will euthanize a greyhound, where are you at with that? That's news to me, and I suppose if there's change in legislation, we'd imagine we'd be one of the first to hear about it. So you might tell me how long that submission is in and where you are with the department on it. And just finally then, on your commercial side, and I'm somebody who was involved in a race committee, I suppose, and we've done a lot of research since the pandemic and since things opened up, not just us now, I'm involved with Quebec, but I suppose nationally, and there seems to be a feeling out there going forward, if we're to get the people back to the extent we want, that we're going to have to provide kind of open air. People tend to be avoiding large, crowded, enclosed areas, which, especially for your night racing, most of the greyhound stadiums would be. The word on the street within the racing circle is put up a marquee with just a roof, no sides, and that's where people tend to, as I said, they're conscious now of going into enclosed areas. have you found that, or can you provide similar such facilities, or do you feel, have you done any research on that? Do you feel that you may need to go along them lines to encourage the people back, or to facilitate what seems to be the new normal or the new needs of a population that are still probably very conscious of the pandemic we've gone through?
Yes, we're very much aware that people are very conscious of enclosed spaces given COVID restrictions, and I suppose we're fortunate in that we have an upstairs and a downstairs and an open area. So it depends on the particular stadium, but yes, we absolutely can facilitate entertainment in the open air. But we're finding actually that in general, the attendances are starting to come back. We're starting to see some group bookings and fundraising activity coming back as well, as much as the regular punter. So luckily, attendances are at 81,000 year to date, which is kind of where we wanted it to be. We had budgeted to be 70% of attendances of 2019 levels, if you like. So that would give us 323,000 is what we would budget for the year. So at 81,000 for the first half of the year, it's not too bad. And given that we had budgeted that we would be open from January 1st, that 2022 effectively would be a full year of economic activity. We lost the first 4 weeks because everything didn't really reopen until bang on the end of January. So yes, we're very mindful and very conscious of it, and attendances are certainly on our radar, and facilitating attendances as people require. To talk to your question on the statutory instrument, yes, there is a statutory instrument with the Minister that has been drafted, and we put a lot of work into it. I think it's the second time we may have drafted it, actually. It may not have been done to the standard required at the time, but certainly now it is. And it's with the Minister relatively recently, I would say. So we're quite hopeful that that's going to proceed as we would like, and these things can never happen quickly enough, as you know. In terms of the whereabouts, the traceability of animals that were identified the last time, I might just pass that to our Director of Regulation in terms of those specific ones. I'm happy to talk to you about 2021. We have all the figures for that.
Thanks, Senator, for your question. Just to maybe advise, myself and the Chairman are actually the two only surviving members of the last party that were before you too as well in 2019. The question of greyhounds that were untraceable, my recollection from the last meeting chiefly, I suppose, centred around greyhounds that were exported rather than greyhounds that were domestically in Ireland. I suppose it's fair to say that the UK provides the most significant export market for Irish greyhounds. The activity of greyhound breeding in the UK is limited insofar as that 80% of the greyhounds in the UK are actually of Irish origin. The figures returned last year came in at 85%. So there's virtually very, very little breeding of greyhounds in the UK, and they depend significantly on the Irish market for greyhounds. Regarding Greyhound Racing Ireland's role, I suppose I would have to emphasise that it's the responsibilities of Greyhound Racing Ireland solely to, I suppose, govern and regulate greyhound racing in Ireland, and these responsibilities don't extend to crossbreeds such as lurchers and things like that, which are often commonly confused with greyhounds. The overall position in relation to the export of greyhounds is that we only advocate the export of greyhounds, and we're on formal record of this, to those countries who have the same and equivalent welfare standards as this country and UK and European standards. We are on formal record as that, and we do not advocate the export of greyhounds to countries with substandard welfare standards. Having that said, though, it's, I suppose, abundantly clear to us that we are not in a position to restrict exports, unfortunately, of any animals, which include greyhounds, to countries, and we are obliged to operate under EU laws and wider world trade agreements that are currently in existence. Greyhound Racing Ireland or any Irish regulator can't, I suppose, be held responsible for greyhounds that are often exported to countries that do have welfare standards but are subsequently exported to other countries. I would advise the Senator too as well that we are in constant and regular communication with our counterparts in the UK and indeed our counterparts in Australia in relation to these matters. Matters have been brought to our attention in relation to greyhounds in Australia. We have investigated these matters on this side here too as well. But unfortunately, the position is we are not in a position to restrict exports of greyhounds. There are no, and I think that the country of China came up the last time we were talking. There is no live trade of greyhounds from Ireland to China unless they go by the UK. And I suppose our regulatory remit and our controls within the Welfare of Greyhounds Act are confined to this jurisdiction. The CEO mentioned where the euthanasia bill is at the moment, and I suppose the Senator asked a question there just on the care centres and foster care centres too as well. I might just defer to my colleague, Mr. Fitzgerald, on that.
Yes, thanks, Senator. In relation to the foster care homes, I'd agree that the time involved can be quite lengthy. I suppose it's similar to essentially any tender process, because again, for the purposes of issuing essentially what is a tender from a semi-state, I mean, all the process has to be gone through, and as a result, once the tender has been evaluated, there's also an element of there's a period of time which is to be given afterwards to give tendering parties a chance to appeal, and then once that has elapsed, then the contracts can be exchanged. So yeah, it is quite lengthy. I would like to say that it would be a lot easier if the way, as you put it, a lot of the additional material could be cut through, but unfortunately it's required. And I mean, I refer to stuff like to tax clearance certificates and a lot of the additional paraphernalia that goes with it, but they're all required. So I would share that sentiment that yes, they can take time and they can be quite slow, but unfortunately most of these things, they're all required. And so that's pretty much in relation to the care centres. There are one of the queries you asked Senator Daly was in relation to if they're sufficient in 8. There are, I suppose, there's a slight line to be drawn. We have foster care centres, and these are centres that would prepare dogs for their forever home. In many cases, where the dogs are being rehomed abroad with creditable rehoming charities, and then we have the foster care, the Greyhound care centres, of which we're currently in the process of confirming 2, and they would be essentially for rehoming dogs here in Ireland. So there would be slight difference in those 2 types of centres. And as I say, currently the care centre tender, which would have been the most recently one that was issued, which was back towards the end of December and which would have elapsed, which the closing date would have been around the end of January. We're currently in the process of exchanging contracts on that.
And just briefly, Chair, do you ask for an expression of interest? Like, do you advertise people to apply to become a care centre?
Yes.
Do you have a cap, on how many you're going to sanction or licence at any particular time, or is it open-ended?
So essentially, Senator, so we would the tender that we would have advertised in December, in pushing into January, would have been for across the region. So there was 4 areas indicated, and there wouldn't be a cap on how many expressions we can receive, obviously, and then once we examine each individual or the applications, then we would have create a list from those regions of the preferred tenderers, and that's generally how we would tend to proceed. But no, we don't necessarily put a cap on them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Senator Lombard.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson CEO, I think we had hearings. I'd like to correct. I'd like to take opportunity to correct the record of the committee, as Paul Daly tried to undermine my position in the last committee. There was 3 of us here, not 2.
That's how much of an impression you made that I forgot you.
So just in that regard, just want to acknowledge Paul's kind thoughts towards me. But anyway, it's another story. Come here. On a very serious note, though, I think we were here in 2019, and I'll openly say I thought the industry was on a cliff edge. I was very fearful to where this industry was going to go. And I must compliment you and the board for what is after happening, CEO. I think major changes have come on board, major traceability changes in particular. And I think the traceability element was a key issue. And we would have, the chairman, and Paul and other members will have spoken about the bovine issue and how the bovines had a traceability pattern put in place since the foot and mouth. And literally within a few months of that, we've had the same system put in place here. And I think it gives confidence towards the system itself. It gives confidence towards the industry. And I think it's been, literally the game changer. And I want to compliment you and the board for your hard work in moving that forward. You might give us an indication of financially how the board is set at the moment, how you think we're going to be going. Obviously, you've been under financial pressure regarding sponsorship in particular. You might give us an indication about the sponsors coming on board and how we're funding our major events, whether it's the Laurels or otherwise, how they're coming on board itself. You might also give us an indication of the interaction with the public. You mentioned figures and how you're going at the moment with figures, and you also gave an indication that community groups, GA clubs, sporting organisations are now coming back into the actual remit of having sporting days or, rent out the complex for a race night. You might give us your proposals going forward, the way you see the actual figures going. And maybe I might ask the chairman to comment on, do you believe the press has been fair to you over the last few weeks and months and years regarding the coverage of races? I would often say that some local papers in particular, you don't see any coverage at the moment. And what work could be done in the medium to short term to ensure that, in particular, that the local papers would pick up on, major sporting events, whether it's the Laurels in my part of the world, or, do you think there is a gap there? And what message needs to go to get some support regarding the press regarding this issue? Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Paul Daly, too.
Okay. Whichever you want to take the questions first.
I was here, Senator. I can confirm you were here. Taking the last point first, which was press coverage. Obviously, we suffered a fairly dramatic decline in popularity in 2019. Some of it deserved, some of it not deserved. And thereafter, the decision was our own as to how we progressed. I think we've done a relatively good job in terms of what we have done with the industry since. I'm not sure that's always reflected in the coverage that we get, but the press are entitled to cover what they want to cover, and it's up to us to make a space for ourselves. I was delighted that the Chief Executive was able to announce that we're back on the national airwaves for the Derby semi-final and final. I think that's a positive development. There's a bit of a disconnect between the coverage locally and the coverage nationally. If you take the local newspapers and local radio, there's actually still quite significant coverage of greyhound racing in the local tracks. Not so much nationally. That's probably reflective of a view that was taken of us. I think that will change. I think the onus is on us to change it. I can probably take finance as well, Senator. The last full year, our accounts are about to be published shortly. They'll show an operating surplus of 3 million. The budget for 22 is 1.3 million. We're holding 3.5 million from Harold's Cross development money. It was agreed at the time of the Harold's Cross closing that a balance of the money left would be used for capital investment, and we intend to spend a large portion of that money in Shelbourne Park over the next 12 months. So on an operating level, we're operating on a surplus, obviously with the assistance of the very significant assistance of state aid.
In terms of, I suppose, commercial activities, we've budgeted to bring in 6.5 million between restaurant, tote, and gate receipts. That compares with 9.4 million in 2019, the first full year of operation. We had originally, that's the reforecast. We had originally budgeted to bring in 7.5, but we opened so late that actually that first month is a big chunk of a quarter. So we don't think we'll make up that difference, but we can see it starting to come back to kind of the 70% levels of 2019 that we had planned for. In terms of GAA groups and fundraisers and, getting crowds back, it was wonderful to see the Conanan Kirby Cup, where we had 20,000 donated to 6 local Limerick clubs. And more of that, please. You know, so it's we're starting to see GAA clubs around the country making bookings for their local fundraisers. We are still subject to some of the cancel culture in terms of when someone hears about it, and we start to get a bit of negative press from organisations that are anti-Greyhound racing. But we will. I think the way we kind of combat that is by continuously improving welfare. And the more you improve welfare and the more demonstration you have of it, it will come back by default. I don't think it's about going out with a nice promotional campaign saying, look how wonderful we are. We have to prove it. The industry has to prove it. And that's our role as regulator. And that's our raison d'etre. So.
Maybe just by way of initial comment to Bill Senator, you mentioned traceability there in your opening remarks. I guess that this board recognised very early in 2019 that traceability was the only game in town, and it was absolutely essential to have a robust and accountable traceability system if the future of the industry was to be maintained. This board have afforded every opportunity and every resource to developing the traceability system that was launched last January. The modus operandi of the traceability system is, unless you engage with this system, you are not part of this racing industry. You don't get to race, and you're actually automatically suspended. You're effectively removed. And by the way, you don't get to get prize money either. All that's withheld. And that's on a clear direction from this board, that this is where the industry has to go. You mentioned, I suppose, media information too as well. The board has, I suppose, kept themselves very much aware of what was happening in relation to certain individuals who, throughout the last number of years, would have committed, let's be honest, reprehensible acts. I can advise this committee that since 2018, 13 exclusion orders have been progressed by this board. And I think that's indicative of a commitment to maintaining the integrity of the industry and ensuring its longevity.
Okay. Senator Boyhan.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Well, firstly, I want to welcome our guests here and our Chief Executive, and to echo what some of the previous speakers have said. I would be coming at this sceptical about the industry. I've consistently raised issues about the funding, state funding, be it to the equestrian industry, but I recognise it's an industry and your own industry. But clearly, having read your submission today, it was palatable. It was clearly jumping off the pages that this was an organisation that had come back, looked at itself, done a lot of soul searching, and confronted issues, and that was clear in the style and the language of the report, and I want to acknowledge that because I think that's really important. And I think you're right, Dearbhla, in relation to the issue of a lot of it hinges around welfare. I recognise it's an industry. I recognise it's potentially a very, very profitable industry, and I recognise the fallout positively in terms of fundraising, community engagement, the GAA. Who stands up here and talks negatively about the GAA? But the potential and the synergies are enormous in for it. So I want to say that because I think that's really, but it is substantial state funding, and every year the Minister for Agriculture comes to both houses of the Oireachtas and makes the case, and every year we talk about should we divide this up for once and for all and have 2 separate sources of funding, and there are maybe good reasons for not to change, but the Minister hasn't necessarily ruled it out for future, so that's something that you need to keep an eye on yourself. But we have the same debates, and at the end of the day, they're all really around the issue of welfare. So I think you put your finger on it, so I want to say that. I also just want to touch on five key points that were in your written statement. So on page 1 you say, no healthy greyhound should have his life ended prematurely. I think that's a really positive statement. For me, that jumped off the page because that's not what the perception is always out there. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to just quickly go through. So you're going to restore and build the image and perception of the Greyhound racing in Ireland, armed with facts and the right welfare and the care. Again, a very positive affirmation about your focus and your attention, and I think that's really, really important. And then under your new system of registering greyhounds, you talk about the tracker at all stages, from birth, microchipping, racing, career changes. Again, I think that was really, really positive. And the welfare inspections, again, there's that reoccurring theme. You're spot on, because you've clearly identified that's where the concern is. It's not about always about the individuals within the organisation. Not everything we read about the individuals in the organisation is correct. Neither is everything that you read about politicians always correct. And so I'm conscious of that. And remember, this morning's paper wraps tonight's chips. But behind all of that, it can leave a lot of people wounded and damaged reputations. And that's a terrible thing to happen. So I think the Greyhound Care Fund, I'd like maybe if you just touch on that, just a little bit on that. And also there's the statutory obligation, of course, to ring fence that, what is it, 10%. And you may go beyond that, it's what you've suggested, which again, I was delighted to read and I was delighted to acknowledge. And I suppose finally, in the fifth point I wanted to touch on, you're talking about working on a 5-year strategic plan. And again, I think that's all very positive and it's all very significant. And clearly you have to have an economic model. Clearly you're a business, clearly you're an enterprise. But to go back, as I said from the very start, my major concern is about the welfare of animals. But I recognise that you're seeking to address that. But I think that's an important thing. I think there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of communication out there to get that message, across. And just in relation back to that obligation of the state's funding, what is your view? Do you think they should be broken up and there should be a disconnect between Irish racing and your own organisation, or do you think you would be clever to stay with the status quo and that works out better for you? Do you have a comment on that? Do you have a suggestion on that? So they're just a few thoughts, and maybe you might respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boylan. Should we be broken up from the Horse and Greyhound Fund? No, we don't have any burning desire to be. In terms of the use of state funds, and is it a good use of state funds, is really what it comes down to, I guess. I believe it is. I believe we should have more state funds, actually, because when you look at it, when you look at what it does in terms of welfare and where we're going, we spent 3.6 million this year on welfare. That's up from 2.2 million in 2019. I mean, we are the regulator for the industry, so we need to have the resources to regulate and do it properly and hold people accountable and have zero enforcement of breaches of welfare. That's the first thing I'd say. We want to regulate and distribute a sport that is well run, that cares, that has the health and well-being of the greyhound at the heart. That's the first thing I'd say. Is it a good use of state funds? Well, apart from the welfare, I mean, the money is used, you know, to run 14 stadia throughout the country, which are their own little ecosystem and their own little economies in and of themselves. And these stadia generated in 2019 over 9 million in revenue. They subscribe to jobs. They also in turn contribute 132.3 million to the economy. So it's an extremely good return on investment, not to the exchequer, notwithstanding the great work that we're trying to do in terms of raising welfare standards and distributing a sport that is our heritage. You know, it's as Irish as hurling and needs to be protected. So do I think we should be, the separation from the fund is kind of not foremost on our radar or on my mind. It's more that the funding is there and that taxpayers can see that it's a very good use of their funds. That's essential. In terms of other points, I hope I can remember.
No, I got the gist of what you're saying. I just want to come back to two issues. In terms of independent oversight of your industry,
yes.
Because it's all very well you telling us all of that, and that's
yes.
hunky-dory and all very nice, but we've got to give reassurance to the public. I'd like reassurances. The independent oversight of your industry, so it's validated independently, so it's not part of the Boys Network or any other network, and I'm not suggesting it is, by the way, but I just want to give that reassurance. We're here to ask a few questions.
Yeah, of course.
So you might just talk about that. And then the other thing, in relation to Harold's Cross, you touched on the Harold Cross Stadium, and you will recall, of course, it might have been before your time, but yes. Your colleagues would be able to recall. There was a lot of unhappy people in relation to that issue. Am I right in saying there was some suggestion that there may be some funding in terms of a dividend to the community there of Harold's Cross in relation to the sale of the stadium? There was a lot of concern around that community that they were losing something that was very, very significant, and the reason they were losing it and the change there. And I thought, I might be wrong, so I'm open to correction here, and I don't have, I'm asking the question, I don't have an answer to a question that I'm asking you. And that's a rare thing for politics, but I just want to ask, was there any commitment in terms of to the community at Harold's Cross in relation to anything as a result of the sale of the property in terms of a community dividend or a community feedback to that community, but which was had a very long historic tie with the industry.
I don't think so, Senator. I think that may have arisen in the context of the next usage of the site, which was Department of Education schools, rather than the vacating of the site by Board Nagon as it was that time. I think our commitment was to use the funds to discharge a very substantial debt that we had at the time, and to put the balance into refurbishment. And I think we've met our commitments in relation to Harold's Cross, or our meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Just 1 second, Senator. Yeah. I have to go to a vote again, so Senator Lombard is taking the chair.
Just the independent oversight.
I suppose, as chairman of the board, I suppose I should say, Senator, that we take our corporate governance responsibilities very seriously. The board is comprised of people from within and outside the industry who take their responsibilities terribly seriously. We are audited by the Controller and Auditor General. All our inspections reports are available online. Any corrective action we take against any person involved in the industry is published. Any adverse analytical findings are published. So it's all totally transparent.
No, I'm very much aware that the Controller Auditor General audits you, and indeed I've looked at them, their reports. No, I was talking about in terms of oversight, in terms of welfare.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I mean any action taken by the board is publicised. Any corrective action we take against any person who is found guilty of any indiscretion is publicised. It's all available online all the time for anybody to look at. We keep the records and they're all public.
Oh, absolutely. Go look at it later. Yep.
Yeah, it'll be up to date as of last month. And all of the traceability is conducted by an independent, verifiable outside agency. So all the figures are absolutely verifiable.
Okay, just to conclude, I just want to again thank you, because I've seen a very marked and positive presentation here, and it's which to be not. I think it's looking good for your industry, and I wish you well and continued success in the next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Boylan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise if I cough. I'm still suffering from post-COVID cough. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming in, and I am heartened to hear that you're focusing on welfare, because as someone who, I think it's of no surprise to anyone knows, I'm not a fan of Greyhound racing, but I think the only way it's going to survive is to improve the welfare standards. So I have a couple of questions just around that. One of them is around the surgical artificial insemination of greyhounds. It's prevalent in the Irish breeding, in the greyhound breeding industry, and unfortunately now also in the companion dog breeding. But the Dáil question that was put in shows that over 400 female greyhounds had surgical artificial insemination in the past 3 years. Now, we know this procedure is banned in Britain. And we had the Irish Veterinary Council here before saying that they're also looking at the procedure, that, you know, I suppose the first thing is you don't do any harm to an animal before you carry out any procedure, and this is a very invasive procedure. So I'd like to hear your views around whether or not you would favour a ban on surgical artificial insemination.
I'm going to ask our Director of Regulation and our Veterinary Director to handle that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I suppose just by way of background, in 2005 the Irish Greyhound Board, the then Irish Greyhound Board, introduced specific regulation around the area of artificial insemination, and the practices governing artificial insemination in this country are subject to the Artificial Insemination of Greyhounds Regulations, which is an SI 561 of 2005. The board's remit in these regulations is chiefly with the issue of licences on an annual basis, and on receipt of an appropriate recommendation from the Irish Coursing Club, who you will be aware are the registration body for all matings and stud dogs in this country. The legislation covers how and where semen may be domestically managed or imported, whichever is the case, and how it may be collected and stored, and covers a raft of regulatory provisions under various different headings under that legislation. It's important to note that while Greyhound Racing Ireland issued licences on an annual basis, it's the Irish Coursing Club who have the specific statutory responsibility to maintain the records around the area of frozen semen implants, artificial inseminations too as well. It is not the remit of Greyhound Racing Ireland. The actual process, I suppose, of the implantation itself,
Yeah.
you know, there's a number of means in which semen is implanted. It could be done under a chilled, refreshed by straw and things like that. But the actual operation there, I may just defer to my veterinary colleague there, just because he's abundantly more qualified to speak about it than I am.
We're specifically talking about the surgical, which involves general anaesthetic, cutting open the female to implant, as opposed to the transcervical or other forms of artificial insemination.
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that it is far more invasive. There is no disputing that. I suppose the surgical option does, I suppose, hold a degree of benefit to some extent, in that where there are particular difficulties, or where not just greyhounds but canine bitches have difficulty in breathing themselves, be it naturally or even using facilities like the transcervical method, surgical would have benefits from the point of view of greater yields of fertility from that point of view.
But not from the dog's point of view.
Not from the dog's point of view, correct, yes. I mean, and I suppose from the point of view of the breed, I would also make the point that it allows us to use semen from potentially countries that are where a greyhound is not standing here. Specifically, I refer to Australia, which for the overall, yes, and I take your point in relation to the specific dog, yes, but from the overall health of the breed, from the point of view of promoting genetic hybrid vigour, it's beneficial. It does have its beneficial uses. From the point of view of the actual surgery itself.
Would that explain why I suppose that 85% of British greyhounds are bred here, or they're Irish origin? Because it's a procedure that's banned in Britain, and it's banned from an ethical point of view.
I can advise that the level of the proclivity of Irish greyhounds in the UK has been at that number for a long number of years. It's I suppose the UK has always depended on Ireland for the lion's share of its greyhounds and racing pools. There is a British Greyhound Racing Stud Book. It's an extremely small one. And I think the number of litters on it are very, very small, to be honest with you. But, you know, before any legislative changes took place in the UK around the prohibition of the surgical procedures you're talking about, the UK is still dependent on Ireland for its racing greyhounds. My colleague has already, I suppose, pointed out, I suppose, the industry advantages of artificial insemination. Maybe just to advise too as well that the geneticist, Donna Berry, who works with Tagus and is probably one of the most advanced geneticists in this country, completed a report on the proclivity of inbreeding in the Irish greyhound some years ago. There's a copy of the report actually available on our website, and he has found, I suppose, that the Irish racing greyhound does have several positive attributes regarding the level of inbreeding, many of which wouldn't be unrelated to the importation of semen along the lines we spoke of.
And just on I suppose then, talking about the care centre, which closed, I believe, in the one in Tipperary in February 2022, and I'm sure you're aware of the social media posts of the person who is running that care centre. I just want to clarify that was built, funding was provided for the building of that. Was that purpose-built, that care centre?
No. So in the original tender, which would have been in around the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic, Greyhound Racing Ireland published a tender stipulating the requirements that they wanted in a greyhound care centre, but it wasn't purpose-built.
Okay, so basically the kennels were there, but you just funded the running of the centre.
Correct. Yeah.
So structurally, it was in existence before the.
Yeah. Okay. And then just on the traceability system, does that include all Irish tattooed greyhounds from birth, or only the successful greyhounds that are registered on the race management system?
Okay, thank the Senator for her question. I suppose just to provide clarity on the data set that's gone in, and I suppose before, I suppose we went about the work of the traceability system, we specifically met with the providers of the cattle movement and monitoring system. We spoke to our Australian counterparts, our GB counterparts, specifically spoke with the Irish Coursing Club too as well around an effective and robust system for recording traceability system. no different than the cattle movement monitoring system. I suppose we had to draw a line in relation to the data set that was to be included in it. There is a certain, I suppose, level of expectation from people that if you go back too far, you know, your likelihood of getting accurate, up-to-date updates on what happened greyhounds may decrease the further back you go. So just, I suppose, to clarify, the data set for the current traceability system that went live in January of 2021 is all juveniles microchipped from January 1st, 2021. You'll be aware that the juveniles are microchipped by ICC stewards. They have the added benefit of being the operators of an authorised database under the microchipping of regulations legislation 2016. That database is called MicroDog. And RSITS receives a direct feed from the Irish Coursing Club in relation to those. But it also includes the data set of active greyhounds registered on the race management system. I'll explain what that is in a second. The race management system is basically our software for recording activity around the areas of racing and trials. It basically records the form lines that you see in a race card for every greyhound. So every greyhound that raced or trialled from January 1st, 2021, in addition to every juvenile that was microchipped from January 2021.
But not from birth.
The date of birth is incorporated in the feed that we get from the Irish Coursing Club with the microchipping information.
So it includes, sorry, just because I'm only familiar with the microchip system for companion dogs. So the animal is microchipped when it's
12 weeks.
12 weeks.
In keeping with the legislation, yeah.
So every greyhound that's bred is microchipped and registered on that database.
The same as every other canine in this country.
And would you have any objection then to that database being included in, because there's calls now to bring, because we have 4 databases for companion dogs and then we have the Irish Coursing Club database. So to bring those together so that information at least is collected in one central portal. So I know the databases themselves have issues around their commercial industry, but that there's a single repository for the databases.
I guess we're not the operators of that database, MicroDog. It's really a question for the Irish Coursing Club. And you do mention the commercial sensitivities around. I think it's, you know, there's a couple more like Fido and Animark and there's Kennel Club as well. So I guess I'd be low to speak on behalf of the Irish Coursing Club, you know.
You don't have any major objection though?
Me, no, but I don't know much about. I don't know much about
okay. And the last question, then, I suppose, is just that report that was in the media on the rise in greyhound track deaths, the 30% increase. So I suppose there's concern, one, in the increase. Do you know what I mean? It is significant. I think it's one of the largest numbers, 154, the highest levels to date. Some of the injuries that were recorded are leg injuries, which is different to horses, can be treated. So, like, just your views on that. But also, like, are we capturing the death rates at the unofficial trials and the trials as well? And then the last point on that is around the presence of vets. So, can we get a commitment that we will have vets present at all meets? So whether that's a race night, official trial, or the unofficial trials, because I think there is real concern that animals are getting injured at unofficial trials, particularly because they're younger, and there's no vet on site to treat that animal, and I suppose just to address the welfare concerns of transporting the animal off site.
If you don't mind, I'll take that one. I mean, in relation to the race industry, the race injuries. I mean, you're correct. I mean, I couldn't disagree with you. The increase was very concerning, very worrying, and obviously, were that to be repeated, it would ask serious questions of us as an industry. And to this end, we have. Greyhound Racing Ireland have, I suppose, taken a number of steps even since the turn of the year, and that would be we've resurfaced a number of our tracks. We've engaged the services of a multinational institute called the Sports Turf Research Institute, who would do quite an amount of work in both Australia and the UK on greyhound racing surfaces and also on horse racing surfaces. And these are experts at, looking at moisture quantity, camber of the bends, etc., etc. So essentially, to try and address the controllables, essentially, the things we can control. And so this week, actually, the Sports Turf Research Institute are visiting 3 tracks around the country, and that's I suppose the first tranche of work that they've taken on with us. And so from that point of view, we have, I suppose, taken measures to address the rise in both injuries and deaths that were there last year. I suppose, just for the information of the members, I suppose for the point of view of 2022, the numbers have, thus far to the end of April, have reduced considerably. So at this point, we're looking at approximately 72 dogs who had been injured and 24 dogs euthanized. That was at race meetings. Sorry, I'm just making note here because I was making sure I wanted to catch all of your queries. In relation to the presence of vets at official trials and unofficial trials and the gathering of data. So since the 1st of November last year, all the injuries injury data has been captured on both unofficial and official trials. Now, to I suppose to segue somewhat into your last question, as it stands, we don't have vets at all unofficial trials and official trials. So, to a degree, the quality of the data is slightly different from unofficial trials and official trials because the people who are gathering the data are not veterinary surgeons and therefore not. I suppose it's not within their purview to be giving a diagnosis. So the information is far bigger picture as such. So we just asked them to indicate the limb, forelimb, hind limb, if it's a hock injury, if it's a back injury, essentially, and we have a category of another if they know the dog was hurt, but they don't know where the dog was hurt because, again, as I say, forming a diagnosis isn't within their purview. In relation to the presence of vets at trials, I know that's the case in the UK that they're present at official trials. They're not present in the UK at unofficial trials. Again, having spoken to colleagues in Australia, the number of official trials in Australia would be very, very small. They largely refer to official trials as what we would classify as conduct trials. So the vast majority of what we would classify as official trials are not classified the same way in Australia, and for the vast majority of them, they're not present at them in Australia either. I suppose the reason being that the information that both of those two jurisdictions have gathered is that the risk of injury is far, far less at trials because of less greyhounds, less potential for collision, less potential for injuries. Yes, some dogs do get hurt. There's no disputing that. However, from the point of view of to bear in mind that in 2021 there were approximately 68,000 additional trials carried on RCE tracks with just under 84,000 dogs. From the point of view of trying to cover that at this point in time, RCE just don't physically have the resources to cover that. Both resources, and also you'll maybe aware that there has been for a period of time there has been an issue with trying to locate veterinary surgeons and veterinary labour has been quite a trick, and that has been for some time. It's not just for the last 6 months. That's been realistically for the last 10 years, and there's no sign of that potentially changing in the immediate term. So, from the point of view of making our resources stretch as far as they can. At the moment, they're at races. If that were to change, or if I suppose the available resources were to change, yes, I would argue strongly for addressing that. But at this point in time, no, they're not. And trying to make those resources stretch just maybe a bridge too far.
So you're collecting the data that. So you do have collected. You're saying now that there is a collection of all injuries that happen at even unofficial trials.
Yes.
And is that then linked to the traceability system? So, for example, if I was to go in and say there's an unofficial trial on Friday, this animal got a hock injury, and then I can trace if that animal was euthanized at a later stage, or it continued to race, or it went into a care centre. Is it that level of traceability available now for all meets, whether that's race nights, trials, or unofficial trials?
Thanks, Senator, for the question. Maybe just to provide some context around the injuries, and you mentioned that the 154 deaths last year. It's 154 deaths too many, and my colleague has mentioned that. And our industry, like so many other industries, it's not a perfect industry. It is not a perfect industry. I wish it was, but it's not. However, this board is committed to improving welfare standards. And I suppose if anyone wants to leave this room today, I'd like you to know that, and I'm the longest member of the executive in the organisation, this board is committed fully to improving welfare standards within the industry. Just on the 154 deaths from last year, you know, I just to give some context of it, there was 1,388 race meetings which took place at 14 licensed stadia with over 15,500 races. There was a total of over 91,000 starters. My colleague mentioned 351 injuries, which reported that represents a figure of 0.38%, and the figure of greyhounds put to sleep or fatally injured represents a figure of 0.17%. It is too much, and we know we have to improve that. My colleagues already mentioned the steps that are already in play to improving those figures. Since November 1st, 2021, and we've mentioned the trial sessions, the staff at the trial sessions, including our racing managers, are reporting injuries sustained in the trial sessions. This information is recorded by an authorised staff member during particular an unofficial or official trial session, so that's both trial sessions, and report to Ross Conairn. During such track activity, the following information is recorded by the authorised staff. This includes the location of the stadium, obviously, and the date of the injury, the owner or trainer of the injury, whether it's an official or official trial session, the name of the greyhound, the prevailing weather conditions, whether the greyhound was provided with contact details of the nearest veterinary clinic, which, by the way, are all available in greyhound stadia. In every weigh room, there is emergency veterinary care access facilities made available in the weigh room. The location of the injury, a brief description of the injury, whether the injury was witnessed and how the injury was reported. Senator, I can advise you that the people who these injuries affect most are Greyhound Racing Ireland staff, because they take such pride in the maintenance of their surfaces. They have been trained extensively to maintain those surfaces. They take huge issue when a greyhound breaks down on a track, and that's to their credit. I'd also like to advise the Senator that in the last 2 years we have specifically introduced an injury recovery scheme, which provides, and it's been recently expanded, that any greyhound that's injured at a race or trial session can recover up to the cost of €1,000 in veterinary fees. So that's available from two as well. In November, Senator, we launched, and the Minister signed off on this. It's a code of practice for the care of a greyhound. It covers areas such as, you know, general welfare principles, but responsible ownership, husbandry issues, hygiene, pest control, nutrition, healthcare, breeding. I won't list them, there's a raft of them there. That's how committed, and that code of practice has specific statutory reference in the Welfare of Greyhounds Act. It's the minimum care that's required in the industry. The area of responsible ownership, you know, and we've advocated, and the chairman has mentioned it already. You know, we are informing, and Senator Boyhan mentioned it too as well. It is the responsibility of every owner in this country to think about retirement plans for his greyhound when they are finished racing. We will assist in that process, but it is their specific responsibility. And we're at record of saying that, you know, people have to start thinking about these things before they enter ownership of a greyhound. It's incumbent on them. Regarding traceability, I can advise the Senator that there are specific plans for phase 2 of traceability. They will incorporate a raft of things such as the uploading of euthanasia certificates for greyhounds. We've mentioned the SI that's in progress in relation to that matter, but also the recording of specific injury data at trials, at races, and things like that. We also envisage things like uploading health checks for greyhounds too as well, in advance of transport and things like that too as well. A lot of that will focus more so on the care side of the greyhound rather than the racing side of the greyhound afterwards. It's a body of work, and I suppose we've been specifically driving this traceability system to meet the needs of the industry going forward. Phase 1 is complete, but it's an evolving animal, and it has to evolve to meet the needs of the industry. So yes, we're committed to recording that in the traceability system.
No, and I appreciate.
And yes, Senator, we will know what happened to that greyhound.
But the public now is the issue.
Yes.
That's, I mean, that's what we're just advocating on behalf of the welfare of the animal that can't speak for itself.
Yeah.
I don't doubt for a second, do you mean that you're putting in place all of these measures, but I'm reflecting the concerns that we're hearing.
Sure.
Which is people want to know that there's that full traceability and that an animal is not suffering needlessly at a race course. And I'll take you on your bona fides, but
I should advise we spent 48,000 too as well in the last 2 years on emergency vehicles in the event of an animal breaking down at a track too as well.
Yeah, no, and I'm aware of that as well. It's just that I was here 2 years ago raising concerns about the Tipperary Care Centre. That seems to have come now to fruition, and I'm glad that, do you know what I mean, the contract has ceased. But my job is to raise those concerns and to try and speak up. But I'm not doubting the fact that you are making huge improvements, and that's very welcome. And I think it is, in terms of the industry, you've no choice if you wanted to survive.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, Senators. On my own behalf, I want to thank you for your attendance. How the industry has developed and changed in the last 2 or 3 years is a credit to you and your board. I wish you the very best of luck going forward, and maybe at a later stage you'll give us an update on how you're going, but congratulations on your performance here tonight.
If anyone requires any other information at any stage, please feel free and we'll get it back to you. No problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I should also say, members of the committee, if at any time you feel you'd like to see one of the care centres,
A field trip, you're very welcome.
we'd be delighted to see you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Organise that now before Jackie comes back.
Thank you, Senator, for that. So Paul didn't even know I was there. The next meeting of the committee will take place on Tuesday, the 31st of May at 3:30. The committee will be held in private session. If there's no other business, I therefore call this meeting to be adjourned. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed.